guys, Matthew Banks here. I have in my possession, my custodialship for a little while, the most phenomenal, rare instrument beastie. The B-flat bass saxophone. Specifically, a Buescher B-flat bass saxophone from 1926, I believe. I'm borrowing this from a friend I play with in dance orchestras. She doesn't need it until gigs come back, and while gigs are slowly coming back, we're certainly not normal yet, as we all painfully know. So, since I have this instrument in my possession, I'm going to ramble incoherently about its history and some stuff about it for a little while, and then I'm going to play some more. Woo! So, the bass saxophone was the original first instrument, first member of the family that sax ever produced and demonstrated. He envisioned the saxophone as a bass instrument, supporting the weaker bassoons and bass clarinets in French orchestras and French military bands. Sax developed his first bass saxophone, one in C, which was shaped a little bit more like a euphonium or an othoclyde, an othoclyde shortly being a euphonium with keys rather than pistons, but that's another rant for another day. But that's the instrument that caught on, that won acclaim, that he demonstrated, and that composers like Kastner, Berlioz, and Rossini first heard and enjoyed. The first two sizes of saxophone to really go into production were the bass, in the othoclyde forward initially, but eventually taking basic saxophone shape, and the baritone. And in that battle, the baritone obviously won, because its range, which is kind of a higher bass range, is more familiar to everybody at matching the cello pretty well, and partially because it was just lighter, easier to play, and easier to carry on the march, which was essential for marketing them to military bands. Nonetheless, saxophones were being produced. Now moved down to the key of B-flat, since the whole CF saxophone family is basically a myth or a meme, if you will. Except for the C melody. But again, that's another rant for another day. So, these instruments occur infrequently in bands, almost never in orchestras. But American bands like Patrick Gilmore's had a bass and apparently a contrabass saxophone. And John Philip Sousa's band, after 1911, started including a larger saxophone section, including a bass saxophone. Some great bass saxophone parts have been included in band works by Percy Grainger, by Alfred Reed, by Robert Russell Bennett, I believe, but especially Grainger, who loved his low reeds. In children's march especially, there's a bass saxophone, a contrabass sarrusophone, and a baritone saxophone, and bass clarinets, and bassoons. It's fabulous. That's the way all bands should be. Now, what we know the bass saxophone for now, at least what I know it for, is its use in early jazz in the 20s and early 30s. The bass saxophone initially became popular in recording studios because in the early acoustic recording technology, the string bass wouldn't carry very well, nor would the tuba. But something about the bass saxophone's tone color, really picked up on those devices. So, in one of Rachmaninoff's only recordings of his own concerto, I forget the number. I read it a few days ago. But instead of there being string basses in the orchestra, the bass part was covered by a bass saxophone. As jazz went on to record, bass players or tubists would also pick up the bass saxophone for the recording. So you'd find people doubling on bass, tuba or sousaphone, and bass saxophone. Though, of course, bass saxophone was also sometimes a saxophone section double. The most famous bass saxophonists of this period are Adrian Rollini, who was both a magnificent bass player, improvising two-beat bass lines, walking patterns that are essential for early jazz, and playing melodic solos, which inspired Harry Carney, Jerry Mulligan, and to an extent Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins also played bass saxophone with the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra. There were Spencer Clark. I don't know that much about him, honestly. I need to do more research. Joe Rustin, and that's just a few. Unfortunately, as tastes changed and the swing era began, the bass saxophone fell a little bit out of favor. It didn't help that it was expensive, and with the turning of the Great Depression, saxophone manufacturers, especially Kahn and Buescher, stopped manufacturing the more exotic members of the family. No more C melodies, no more F mezzo-soprano saxophones, and certainly very, very few bass saxophones. And since then, the bass saxophone has been a little bit obscure, though weirdos pick it up like myself. A couple of modern jazz players use it for a different sound, and it occurs sporadically in musicals like West Side Story, and sporadically in new band works. There are two styles of bass saxophone that have been made, actually. The one I'm holding is called the American Rap. It's got this giant boom out front, which I think looks really cool. The way that the instrument's normally built in Europe is called the French Rap, or Selmer Rap, if you will, because Selmer, Noblet, such companies produce the instruments in a way that basically makes it look like, and sound like, a larger baritone saxophone. Now, let me start talking about this instrument. This is a Buescher. It's an American rap instrument, an American-made bass saxophone from the 20s. It's keyed from low B flat up to high E flat, lacking the high E and high F key. Those keys started being added to Kahn's and Buescher's, the professional models, in 1929, but then the crash happened, so not very many of them were made, and they're quite expensive to find now. This instrument is almost fully keyed, except for those two absent keys. It has a couple of extras. Like, it has this neat device, which is plugged in this instrument, and I don't want to alter it because I'm borrowing it, called the fork D flat, wherein if you finger D and you trill your middle finger on your right hand, you can access a E flat from the other side of the horn. It's a neat device. The pinky arrangement is also a little bit more primitive. There's no roller from the low B flat key to the other keys, but you can kind of get around that. And most interestingly, the harmonics on this instrument pop really well. So you can access high E and high F fairly easily. Etc., etc. Now, there are some imperfections and interesting things about this build of instrument. The most obvious to me is that middle D, or D with the octave key, simply doesn't work that very well, nor does middle E flat. This is a normal middle D. Awful, stuffy. Normal middle E flat. A little bit better, but still stuffy. Conventional bass saxophone technique, as I've been learning on the fly from helpful people on the internet, is you can add the D key to either note, or the E flat key to E flat, or you can just use those keys singly. This is D with just the D key, E flat with just the E flat key. And they work out pretty well. But it poses a challenge to technique. Other challenges to technique include middle C in both octaves being kind of awful. By middle, I just mean middle finger C. Of course, now it sounds kind of okay. But it is vastly inferior compared to the side key fingering of C. Normal, side key. Normal, side key. That also happens to a lesser extent with B flat. Side key. Fork. Side key. So, a lot of options to experiment. I imagine different reed choices and mouthpiece choices can alleviate these problems, but I'm just working with a buddy's wide neck baritone saxophone mouthpiece I'm borrowing. My normal baritone saxophone mouthpiece, my Autolink, doesn't work that well with this instrument. Let's see, other things. F sharp's a little bit low. Like maybe 15 cents, but you can bring it up by adding the chromatic key. And some of the horn doesn't seal perfectly. But those are issues for the owner to solve when it comes back into their possession, I imagine. So let me play a little bit of something for you guys. This is a real pretty Ellington tune I like. One that features Harry Carney's magnificent baritone saxophone playing. It's called I Let a Song Out of My Heart. Up Out of My Heart, sorry. As you can see, though I'm not a perfect player, this instrument has an absolutely gorgeous sound. Dark, rich, earthy, very inspiring. Now, I've played a couple of gigs on this already. I've been a bass player for a Dixieland band down here a couple of weeks ago. That was a lot of fun. I'm hoping to do a little bit more until I have to give the instrument back. And I'll probably make a couple of a cappella videos, you know. So at any rate, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to try to, post more regularly here on YouTube since, wow, 200 people like me enough to subscribe to me. That's really cool. And everybody stay safe out there.